So on behalf of Srijan Samvad, I welcome everyone in this 125th Symposium, where we have very eminent editor, writer, Mr. Amitava Nag. We have with us Dr. Vijay Sharma, who is the strength, who is the pillar of this entire Srijan Samvad activities, which we do, for the sake of literature, for the sake of cinema. And this May month is quite precious one because Mrinal Sen, the renowned filmmaker, who is a we all know that from Satyajit Ray, Ritvik Khatak, Tapan Sinha, and along with these stalwarts, Mrinal Sen has an altogether different position in Indian cinema. So we will talk, and May is important because Mrinal Sen is completing his 100th year. Mr. Amitava Nag, who himself is so well versed in Indian cinema and who has written almost more than half a dozen books on Indian cinema, on Tapan Sinha, Soumitra Chatterjee, some in Bangla, most of them are in English. We are looking forward to his new arrival, 75 films, and I'm sure this is coming in the on the occasion of 75th anniversary of Indian independence. But today we are going to focus on Mrinal Sen, the contribution of Mrinal Sen and Indian new wave in cinema, how it has been very important, and how you see this entire journey of Indian cinema and the contribution and the role of Mrinal Sen's film, whether they are in Bangla or in Hindi. So that would be the focus today. I invite you to speak on Mrinal Sen and his contribution, sir.
Thank you, and good evening to all the viewers, and a very, very, very big thank you from my side to Dr. Vijay Sharma and to Dr. Neha Tiwari for inviting me on the 125th Srijan Samvad meeting. I just got to know that it's completed 12 years, as Dr. Sharma just mentioned, and she asked me to briefly speak about the magazine which I edit, which is called Silhouette, and we have been editing it from 2001. So it was a film club which we formed in 2000, 2001, and the magazine with the same name, and the magazine Silhouette came out in 2001. So when she mentioned that it's a long journey, 124 meetings before this one, I can wholly relate my experience with Silhouette because it's a tough one. It's a tough one because the technology's changed very fast. The technology's changed, caught us unawares at times, and now with the online thing, and before that, online web thing, means the virtual meeting like this one. But even before that, when we had the websites and we moved our magazine to the website because the cost factors were huge. But yes, I congratulate Srijan Samvad for trying to continue this zeal of discussing art and cinema, because it's difficult to continue on a long time basis, and when you don't have big money lenders backing you. So that's a difficult task, and my wholehearted congratulations and my best wishes to all involved in this process. And I think there are many who are doing in silos. We don't know always whoever are doing this type of activities all across the country, and these platforms let us understand and interact and share our experiences. So a big thumbs up for doing this for the last 12 years. Now coming to today's session on Mrinal Sen. Mrinal Sen was born on the 14th of May 1923, so he is completing 100 years. Uh, and apart from his contribution to the new wave, what I thought is that I will try to uh, take the audience along a journey through his early years and the different phases of his film career. Now, every filmmaker who has lived for a long time, who has made films for a long time, uh, I think they go through several phases. Like if we take the example of Satyajit Ray, he had gone through several phases where he started off with a classical one, which was mostly based on classic literature, like Pather Panchali and so Aparajita and so on and so forth. And then in the late 60s and the early 70s, he moved to the more contemporary ones on the city, and then again he moved back to then he moved to children's films with the Feluda films or the Gopika and Bakabain, and then again he moved to the classical mold. Similarly, Mrinal Sen also had a few phases which I think uh, we should uh, we should try to understand, and then we will probably evaluate him better as an Indian filmmaker who had lived the time. So he started off with a film which is called Raatbhore, and that was, I guess, in 1955, 54, 55, that period. And he, at every instance possible, he said that it was a bad film, and he didn't want to remember that film. But if we can think of his first phase as a more or less a 10-year period between 1955 and 1964, he made a few films. Uh, Very important in that phase is Baishe Sravana. The reason Baishe Sravana is very important because it looks at the Bengal famine of 1942-43, which is also referred to as the Great Bengal Famine. I don't know why it is called great, because there is nothing great about famine. But anyway, that is how in English we refer it as the Great Bengal Famine. So he made a film on the Great Bengal Famine of 1942-43. And very interestingly, he did not portray any image, any scene, any landscape of the devastation that the famine had created. Long after this film, in 1974, 73-74, Satyajit Ray made Ashwini Sanket, which is also based on the same famine. But Ray showed the devastation of famine within the grandeur of nature. But for Mrinal Sen, in Baishe Sravana, which is again very interesting, the name is very interesting in the sense that those who know Baishe Sravana, or the 22nd day of the Indian calendar of Shravan, is actually the death day of Rabindranath Tagore. But that has nothing to do with the film as such, apart from the fun with the name. It is actually the marriage ceremony, the marriage date between the man and the woman in the film. So in Baishe Sravana, Mrinal Sen showed how the famine is creating a rift between a man and his wife, and not only the 50 lakhs people who died just like that, and the pictures which we have seen about people dying on the streets of Calcutta, it is also how it is creating a rift, and it is decaying the relationship between a man and a woman, and a husband and a wife. This is important not only cinematically as one of the early realistic films which we have seen in Indian cinema, but also because this is the film where Mrinal Sen takes up uh, the theme of decay, poverty, and ruins. Now, this is one concept, this is one theme which he mostly followed throughout his filmic career. The theme of decay, the theme of ruins, and the theme of relationships. Now, most of the times when we talk about Mrinal Sen, we think that he's a political filmmaker, and he's not a filmmaker who has shed light on the human relationship the way probably Satyajit Ray had done. He had done it differently. Now, in that phase, in this first phase between 55 and 64, he made a few other films which unfortunately are not available to watch. But one film I will mention because it is recently made available in one of the Bengali OTT channels called Hoichoi. The film's name is called Punascha, which was made in 1961. And the story is like this, that there is a character which is a woman character who goes out to work. He takes up a job because her fiance, the man, is unable to provide for both of them once they get married. And that creates a tension not only with the boyfriend, but also with her family, his father, his brother, so on and so forth. The reason why this film is important is its timing. This is made in 1961, 2 years before Satyajit Ray's Mohanagar was being made, almost on similar theme. So that is precisely the reason why we want to mention or we should remember Punoscho, because that is the time, the early 60s, when many educated Bengali women are going out to work, and how the, the society and the family reacts to that. So it came up in Punoscho in 1961. It also came up in a very different way in Ritik Ghatok's Meghadaka Tara. And it again came up in a different way 2 years down the line in Satyajit Ray's Mohanagar. Incidentally, it's the same time when my mother also started going out to work, and I felt betrayed few years after that my mother is going out to work. So it's that reflection which is coming out in the films of these masters, in the films of Sen, Ghatok, and Rai. Now, and there is also another film which was made, I think, in 1964 or something, which is called Protinidhi, which also had, and it's not available anywhere, but it also has a very interesting theme about a divorcee woman with a child and she getting married to a man. So how this child is creating a problem between the man and the woman. Now it's very interesting because this is a theme which was made into a film in 1964. Uh, One of the other things which I want to mention about this first phase of Mrinal Sen is the fact that unlike many others, in this phase and subsequently we will find that in this phase, in the first phase, he was making mostly linear narrative films. So these are having a story with a typical linearity in it. However, he is not picking up stories from famous Bengali writers or Indian writers for that matter. So his idea of liberating cinema from the grasp of literature was there even in the first phase of his filmmaking. Now, as we go along, we will see like he tried to break away from the cinematic linear form as well. But what is important is that even in the first phase, when he was following the linear form, he was trying to make films on stories either written by completely unknown writers or not so significant writers like Achinta Kumar Sengupta. Achinta Kumar Sengupta was a great poet, but as a short story writer, he probably is not one of the finest which we can get in Bengali cinema. He was not a Tagore, he was not a Vibhuti Bhushan, he was not a Manik Bandyopadhyay or a Tara Shankar or many others on whose stories we have seen films being made. Now, to me, the second phase of Mrinal Sen is very interesting. It is roughly between 65 and 69 and covers mainly three feature films, starting with Akash Kusum and then Matir Monisha and then Bhuvan Shom in 1969. Now, the reason this phase is what I feel is very short is because this is the time when Sen is trying out with his experimentation. He is still following, at least in Matira Monisha and Akash Kusum, he is still following a more or less linear narrative form. But what he is injecting, he is injecting those sort of quote unquote gimmicks with freeze frames and jump cuts and stuff, which he got inspired from the French New Wave of Godar and Truffaut. So that that is the phase when he was mm, uh, trying to cope up with a different sort of idiom for his films. And also one thing we should mention here, that none of his earlier films, those 5, 6 films which he made in from 55 to 64, were uh, runaway box office hits. He was not critically acclaimed to that extent as well in the first 10 years. So he got the liberty to try out new ways. He was not like a Satyajit Ray who was a success in every sense of the term right from his first film or the first 2, 3 films. So none of the awards came his way internationally. Nationally, he got his first award for Punascha as the best Bengali film, but nothing more than that. Akash Kusum is a very different take. He was sort of mocking at this young man who, unfortunately, at that time, which is 1965, and so we are almost 2 decades after independence, and nothing is actually working out for the youth. So that frustration, this man is venting out in form of telling lies and putting up a facade which is not his own. Not only the film did not make box office success, but unfortunately it ran into very bitter controversy between Satyajit Ray and Mrinal Sen in the pages of the English newspaper, The Statesman. Now, it's unfortunate because it is very uncharacteristic for both Ray and Sen, and it is probably, even when we look at it today, uh, below Ray's stature to attack Mrinal Sen with such venom in the pages of the newspaper, and it went on for over a month before the Statesman issued a notice that they will not bring out anything anymore on this topic. But what is important in this phase, there are two things which are very important. One is Matir Monisha is a film which Mrinal Sen made not only in Uriya language, but also the location was Orissa. It is important because before that, there had been cases where, and this film was made in 1966, so there were cases where non-Bengali actors were casted in Bengali films by both Ray and Tapan Sinha and others. But those were essentially Bengali films, and those characters were essentially non-Bengali characters. But this is the time when a Bengali filmmaker is going to a different place outside of his native and making a film in the other language. Now, what penalty which Sen had to give is that the critics and the intellectuals in Calcutta said that Sen doesn't have that much lineage to the language and the place, and that is the reason why he is going out to try out. So Martina Monisha was a failure, but it is important in understanding that Sen was trying to break free, trying to experiment in whatever way he can. So he was trying to experiment with the form, he was trying to experiment with the linearity, he was trying to experiment with new writers who are short story makers and not novelists. He was also trying out with a different locale and a different language. But very interesting, after a year, he made a documentary which is immensely forgettable. It is there in YouTube. It is a bad documentary called Moving Perspectives, made in 1967. But it had two things again going for Mrinal Sen. One is that it was made in color. So that was the first time he made a film in color because it was a films division sponsored film. So it was a government sponsored film. But more importantly, that is the time, and if you can understand, 1967 is a time when the first seeds of Naxalite movement are rupturing in West Bengal. And that is the time when he is traveling across the country to make this documentary. And he is getting a first-hand experience of the life all across India and not only in his in his native Calcutta or West Bengal. So that is the first time Mrinal Sen is getting a feel of what the country is facing. Very interesting, because this is a government-backed, government-sponsored, government-backed film. It talks about the 1,000 years of history and the glorious history which India had. And it was made in 1966, but it does not refer to the China War, Indo-China War of 1962. It's very strange. But Sen later on made up for it in the sense in Calcutta 71, if I remember correctly, or it may be in Podatik, one of the two Calcutta trilogy films, that he makes a statement just reversing the statement which was in a voiceover in the moving perspective, that the history of India is a history of poverty. Whereas in moving perspective, he is saying, the narrator is saying, the history of India is a history of glorious thousands of years of culture and prosperity and so on and so forth. So these two things, I think, the courage to go out of your own native land and making a film in a different language, and the experience of the reality of the greater India, and not only your local West Bengal or your local city, is actually the cornerstone from where he made the jump. From where he made the jump to make a film called Bhuvan Shom in 1969. So Bhuvan Shom to me is not a film which happened just like that. It happened because of Matira Monisha in 1966 and Moving Perspective 1967. Now I don't want to go into what Bhuvan Shom is all about. Like most of us probably have seen the film, and it actually started so-called the Indian New Wave cinema in 1969, along with two other films. One was Monica Kaul's Uski Roti, and the other was Basu Chatterjee's Sara Aakash. But in Bhuvan Shom, if we look at it, as compared to his previous films, this is the first film where he did again two things. One is, this is a film which is an open-ended film. And subsequently we will find one trait of Mrinal Sen is that his films had always been or mostly been open-ended. And the second one is that this is the film where he first started to merge documentary footage within a feature film. His next phase, which is from 1970 to 78, which is the polemical phase, if we can say. I don't call Mrinal Sen a political filmmaker, but more of a polemical filmmaker. So this is the polemical phase where he is looking from a macro vision. He is looking at the life of the Indian middle class and the city life, and the Calcutta trilogy, which is Interview, Calcutta 71, and Podatik, made in a span of 2-3 years. But in all these three films, and in many other films, we will find that he had mixed the different media, he had mixed different footages, which was first seen in Bhuvan Shom. In Calcutta trilogy, he was harping on the time through which the city was going through. So there were a lot of these documentary footages about the Michils and the protests and so on and so forth. And in this phase, he was also showing how the poverty, the concept of poverty had taken over. And it had been like that for centuries. Like in Calcutta 71, it starts off saying that I am a man of 20 years and I have been walking for so many thousands of years. And through this journey, I can see that it is the poverty which is the recurring theme. Now, when we spoke about the Bengal famine of 1942-43 made in Baishe Sravana, which is in 1960-61, he made another film in the next phase called Akale Sandhane, where also he tried to look at this concept of poverty and famine. And in that film, I'm just jumping a bit ahead, but in that film, in Akale Sandhane, he was mentioning the food crisis of 59, he was mentioning the famine of 40 to 43, and the crisis of 71 due to the Bangladesh Liberation War. And he was trying to say that this is the recurring thing of the Indian and specifically the Bengali history. The recurring theme is that of poverty. The recurring theme is that of deprivation. The recurring theme is that people on the streets are not looked after. And if we come back to this polemical phase of 70 to 78, when he made this Calcutta trilogy, we will see that a lot of footage, apart from the documentary ones, a lot of actual real footage is on the streets. And even before, he made films where the reflection of the city was there. Like in Nila Pashen Niche, the city was there. In Punoscho, the city was there. In Akash Kusum, the city was there. But in those films, the city was a mute backdrop. The city was not as important as we find in the Calcutta trilogy films. And the camera movements were different. The handheld camera, the jerks, which we also find very similar in Satyajit Ray's Pratidwandi and Jon Aranyo, the two films where the camera was on the streets, and we'll find that the camera was moving a lot because the camera was handheld, and we are trying to see the city through the eyes of the protagonist. So we are trying to see the city through the eyes of the protagonist, and that is the reason the camera moves as if it is the eye of the protagonist who is walking on the street, and not like, say, for example, in Ray's case, not like how the city is shown in Opus Sangsar or how the city is shown in Mahanagar, where someone else is looking at the city, who is the director. But in these films, it is the character who is looking at the city, not the director. So that is the very nuanced difference in point of view. But apart from that, what is important is, in the previous phase, in the second phase of his filmmaking, he was trying to follow, as we said, he was trying to follow, or rather not follow, he was getting inspiration from the French New Wave. So there were those sort of gimmicks which were there. But in this phase, it was more of an agitprop style of third cinema, which we have seen in Latin America. So the first cinema is the Hollywood, the second cinema is the art house European films, and the third cinema is where you are involving the audience, is the one which is inclusive. It is not an auteur's point of view. So that is where these films of Calcutta trilogy are so different, both for Ray and also for Mrinal Sen. Because in these films, specifically for Mrinal Sen, more than Ray, is the way he is involving whatever sort of different media he can get. And in, say, for example, in interview, you will find Ranjit Mallik speaking to the camera directly. And not only Ranjit Mallik, other characters are also speaking to the camera and saying, oh, is this cinema? We never knew it is talking about my life. So this involvement is different from what he was making in other films in the previous phase. So this is the way where probably Sen was trying to embrace the tenets of third cinema, which he already came to know. The Latin, the films of Fernando Solanas and others, he already came to know about those films by that time. So I have a feeling that he was trying to incorporate those elements, and that is why some of these films were a bit propagandist. So you'll find that they have a lot of propaganda, and a few things were pretty much out of place. Even in Calcutta 71, if you look at it, there were these three stories which were at a very high level. And then in the beginning, when he is taking cue from interview, and in the last one, you will find that he is trying to say too much and not involving the audience in those. So whatever experimentations he was doing, it was continuing till this phase, till 1978. What I find that the next 10 years or 14 years or so, almost till his last film, starting from 1979, which is Ekdin Protidin, that is to me his best phase. The best phase of Mrinal Sen, according to me, is when he started off introspecting at the micro level the relationship between the different. It's not about only man and woman like in Baishe Sravana. It is not about man and the city. It is about the whole structure of the class, mostly the lower middle class of India, probably mostly the Bengali, but he also made films like he made Genesis and he made Kandahar and other films which are made in different languages. But in Agdin Pratidin or in Kharij, these are the two highlight films which two films which I want to highlight because they are showing the very nuanced, the very sensitive depiction of the middle class. And this is the time when, unlike in Akash Kusum or in Bhuvan Som, he is not having an iota of sympathy for the hypocrisies of the middle class. This is the time when he is absolutely skating. Now, the previous phase, when he's making films like The Interview or Calcutta 71, then he had a lot of sympathy for the movement. He has a lot of sympathy for the youth. But when you come to Kharij, when you come to Agdin Pratidin, when you come to Kandahar, you'll find that there is absolutely no sympathy for the middle class. And he is at his skating best when he is putting the mirror in front of the middle class and telling them that, look, this is how you look. Whatever way you think you look different, but this is actually how you look. And this concept of ruins and decay, which I mentioned in Baishe Sravana, are coming back not only structurally, like in the houses which we see, the village which we see in Genesis, the house which we see in Kandahar, the house where so many tenants were staying in Agdin Pratidin, not only in the physically, but at the psychological, the metaphysical level as well, the ruin and the decay, that is coming back over and over again. Even in Antorin, which was made in 1993, I guess, is one of his is the penultimate film. This concept of psychological decay is very much there. The other thing which I will mention before ending my part of it, and then we can have questions or if there are other discussions, is unlike any other filmmaker whom I can recall, the what should I say? The focus on women had been Mrinal Sen's repertoire right from the very start. Like in Nilakash and Niche, which happens to be his second film. That is a film where you will find that there is this Chinese silk trader who is in Calcutta, and he is forming a very very sweet bond with a Bengali woman who is supporting the freedom struggle. This woman is supporting the freedom struggle, and this man is trying to support her. And then when he goes back later on, he is going into the revolution between the China-Japan war. But right from that till Agdin Pratidin or Punascha or in Kandahar or in Akalesh Sandhane or any of these films, you will find that there are very significant women characters. If you look at Satyajit Ray's films, you will find that he had important mother characters or secondary characters in his first few years. And then he had in Mohanago, Charulata, and in those phases, he had very important women characters. Those films, we can say in today's parlance, women-centric films. But after that, in the 70s, you will find that with the Feluda films and the Gopika Baga films, there are no major women characters. In Mrinal Sen, because he once mentioned that he found that psychologically somehow the women are more mentally strong than the men. And that is coming back over and over again. In Akalesh Sandhane, if you remember the character played by Srila Majumdar, and there is another character which was played on screen by Smita Patil. So that's the film within film. And you will find that both the characters share a certain bond. And apart from that, they are the ones who have survived. surviving, the character within the film and the actual character played by Srila Majumdar in the Mrinal Sen film. Those are the characters who are surviving because they are the ones who will take forward. They will the one who will survive and they will take the story forward. So I think one very important aspect of Mrinal Sen's film, apart from his depiction of ruin and decay and how it changes from the physical to the psychological, is his placing of the women characters. I think that is more or less what I thought of taking through the four phases, which I think are more or less the way I see his films. It's not based on the decades, but it's based on the types in which he, or his search in trying to make films differently.
Yeah. Thank you, Amitava sir. And uh, uh, I'll have to say that you have so much, very systematically, actually, you have described Mrinal Sen for us. And it has been joy listening to you on Mrinal Sen. Joy, I'm saying, because you have not only, given nuances of his work, but you have compared him with Satyajit Ray. In your discussion, you have talked about his Kolkata trilogy and how he has picked up linear and non-linear and all experimental, things in his cinema. I would like to ask you, and if there is any question from the audience, you can in between, put down on your chat box. But my question is on migration, the theme of migration, because we all know that Mrinal Sen belongs to, he was born in Bangladesh at that point of time. So Faridpur, and later on he moved to Kolkata for his studies and stayed in South Kolkata all his life. So, uh, and we have of similar, background. Ritvik Ghatak is also there. So, do you think that migration has come or displacement has come in Mrinal Sen cinema? And if it is there, then how you can see that how he has tried to depict? Is there any pain, or is there just it's a part of history or part of your background that you have to migrate? We all are wanderers. That kind of philosophy is there. So, your opinion on that?
It's a very interesting question because if you look at Mrinal Sen, don't we all think that it's very strange that he so seldom speaks about his native Bangladesh. It's not that, like me, my father migrated from Bangladesh, so far I have no personal relationship with Bangladesh for that matter. But for him, he came to this part of the border, I think at the age of 17 or so. So that means he had fair amount of experience and memories in his native place. And I read somewhere in Facebook, and I also read his memoir where he mentioned about the house where they stayed in Faridpur. They had a big pond, and in that pond, he had a younger sister called Reba, and Reba uh, uh, died by drowning in that pond. So when they when they finally left that house, so his parents came afterwards. So he came before. He came in, I think, 1940 something. He came at the age of 17 or 18. So that must be 1941, 40, 41, like that. And his parents came later on, and they requested those who bought the house at that time that they had created a sort of a samadhi or a bedi sort of thing in memory of Reba, and they said that you please protect this one. You can just build a new house or anything, but you protect this one. And much later in his life, when he and Gita Sen they visited Bangladesh and Faridpur, they found that it was kept like that. So that was very good gesture from those who bought the house. But see, why? There are two things which I think. One is that when he came, he must have come to Kolkata at the in 1940-41. So from whoever I have heard about this Bengal famine, the depiction in the streets of Calcutta is so immense and so huge that within a year or so he was uh, drawn into the vortex of that there is no adjective which can depict that heinous crime which was committed to human being by others. But anyway, so that he saw firsthand, and because he migrated before the partition himself, so the trauma of partition was probably not in him in that sense. That is number one. Number two, I have a feeling that with Ritwik Ghatak portraying the tragedy of partition and the migration in that extent, Mrinal Sen could understand that this is not a forte which he would try to address. So he was probably trying to make himself acceptable to the people of West Bengal by saying, I am a citizen of the city. I am an urban citizen. If you read his text, you will find that n number of times he has mentioned that I am an urban citizen. But if we look closely into his films, we'll find that n number of times he had gone out of the city into the rural places. He made Okauri Kothao, he made Matira Monisha, he made Akalesh Sandhane. All these places he had gone because he had carried the village with him in his heart from Bangladesh. That's what I feel. But yes, he never said that he had why he didn't make films on partition or whatever this migration as such. But the migrant thing was there. So the migration is more of at a psychological level.
Definitely. Thank you so much, sir, for this, I believe, very extensive answer on this particular issue. And I think your observation that because he left Bangladesh before partition has played a huge role in his, taking up this issue on cinema. Another thing which I wanted to ask is that Satyajit Ray in his later films, especially in the last one, Agantuk, that film shows a kind of ideology or kind of message he wants to give uh, to the world, that the modernism or maybe science, all these kind of developments, they need to looked at from the perspective of whether we are going into correct direction or not. So do you find this kind of understanding there in, or maybe kind of, philosophy which Mrinal Sen also wants to put forward to the world? Because there is a sea change in the approach. This is my point of view. In Satyajit Ray's first cinema and the last, we think it's more of about nature, it's more about kind of rural problems and all those things. But in Agantuk, and it's very cinematic when we look at the first cinema, Patri Panchali, and when we talk about the last one, Agantuk, it's more rather talkative film because there are too much discussion, too much debates that's going on. So do you find this kind of changes, because you have already talked about the middle, his approach changed towards middle class. So technically, is there any change which is in your observation?
Again, this is a very interesting take because you mentioned that Satyajit Ray's Pather Pachali to Agantuk. What I feel, let me be very honest. Uh, Agantuk's Monomohan, I think Monomohan is the name of the character played by Utpal Datta. So Monomohan, to me, is an extension of Opu. So it is the journey from Opu to Monmohan which completes the cycle for Satyajit Ray. And you will find that there are traits of Opu in Monmohan. That someone wants to look outside, someone who is an observer, someone who wants to know the world, is there as much in Opu as it is in Monmohan. The difference is that Opu is going out from the village to the city, and Monmohan is going out from the city to a different country. but the journey is towards the same. The journey is towards a knowledge which is unconquered, and it is the I in English as me, and the I which is EYE. So those are merging in Opu and in Monmohan. And Satyajit Ray had this fascination for this type of grandeur in philosophy, in grandeur in concepts. But if you look at Mrinal Sen's films, most of his films had always been very fragmented, very fractured. So he's trying to look at the crevices. So when there is a, so if Satyajit Ray is looking at a flower vase in entirety, Mrinal Sen is breaking the flower vase and trying to see the light coming out from the crevices. So it is probably not possible for Mrinal Sen to try to make a film which is philosophical in that sense. So he is making films which are polemical, which are not philosophical. He's looking at the gaps in our existence, in our understanding, and he is continuously trying to reinvent himself. So for him, I think a film which is what we call the swan song is not possible. Like what is possible for Kurosawa in Dreams, what is possible for Satyajit Ray in Agantuk in much lesser capacity than Dreams is not possible for Mrinal Sen.
Yeah. Yeah. My next question is he used to call him personal Marxist. That's what I have read, a lot. That people to say that he is Marxist, but he used to say that I am not a political. Yeah. Dr. Vijay, are you saying something? Okay. So, what is your take on
Dr.
what actually he wants to convey to us by saying that I am a personal Marxist, not the political one or party one?
Because like he was not a full timer of any political party, and uh, I think it's very difficult. We give these adjectives left, right, and center without much thinking, in the sense that it is very difficult to become a political filmmaker. It's very difficult to become a political artist. Forget about that. But even a political filmmaker is very difficult because you are actually going to say the government organizations to ask them to finance your film, or you are going to private organizations and asking them to finance your film. So it's very difficult to become a political filmmaker and then you criticize the government and you take the award from the same government in your National Film Award. So it's a very complicated, complex uh, equation. But I think in his personal life, he was Marxist. I was watching, I think Calcutta at 71 or interview, I think, and it was mentioned in that it's coming up on the screen that computer is the job eater. Now, in 2023, we don't think the computer as the job eater. We are thinking the computer and the internet as the platform which is making the network. It's the one which is connecting us. It's not eating our job. So I think this political ideology, and that is why I said that many of his, some of his films, and many times in those films, he was trying to be propagandist. So I think his Marxism at the personal level and at the artistic level is in this propaganda. Because if you look at that time, at least in West Bengal, I know that that is the time when there was a severe opposition to computerization. And the government was trying to think that, okay, the computerization is the one which will actually take away your job. So anyway, I'm coming to your question. I think the problem is that he was not a Marxist filmmaker in that sense, but he had his definite leftist lineage, which came across in his depiction of in his depiction of the urban life and also in his depiction of the rural life in many of his films.
Yeah. We have one question from the audience. Very eminent writer himself. He's a short story writer, Amaar Sharma ji. He's asking, That can you give your comment on how Ray and Sane they are different in their perspective on cinema, or
Uh,
rather for the filmmaking?
yes, I think Satyajit Ray is more of a Satyajit Ray belongs to, I just mentioned about this third cinema. So Satyajit Ray belonged to the first cinema. He belonged to the typical linear narrative style. He mostly stayed in that part only. Even in his Calcutta trilogy films, it was a linear narrative. So it starts and it goes somewhere and it ends, and there is not much breaking of the narrative. Uh, so he was a classicist in that sense. Uh, Whereas in Mrinal Sen, he tried to experiment with the form, with the language, uh, and with the linearity of the story, much more than Satyajit Ray. But in many cases, he did not succeed. Like when we look at those films today, at that time, those films can be experimental. But if you look at those films now, we find that those films probably some of his films may not have stood the test of time. At least that is according to me. So that is why I felt that his phase from 1979 onwards with with Agdin Prosidin is the best phase because at that time he was going back to a linear narrative style, but his introspection has become sharper. Satyajit Ray, as I mentioned just a while ago, his films is like a very sophisticated carpet. You can marvel at it. And if you put a lot of dust and dirt and make it messy and try to find out a pattern within that, probably that is what is Mrinal Sen. So their perspectives are different. But even within that, Mrinal Sen has given us ample films which will make us think what is it now and how things have not changed over the last 50 years.
Yeah, very interesting
In terms of
observation there.
poverty, in terms of like whatever we have seen during the corona times, the plight of
Yeah.
the people on the street, it has not changed much. So there is what I mean is there are a lot of advancements which have happened, but there is a lot to do to the people on the street.
Yeah. Okay. I think I would like to conclude this entire symposium with a question related with little humor and comic element, which Mrinal Sen has given to some of his movies, especially to Bhuvan Shom and all. So combining, neorealist cinema, and when you are talking about middle class, when you are talking about even rural area and underprivileged, but the specific comic element, the humor which he has kept in his cinema. So if you can talk about a little bit on that, that would be the nice thing, and we will be able to conclude this session on lighter note.
Right. I think that was in uh, one reason for that is probably, at least that's what we get to know from his interviews and his writings, that he never took himself too seriously. I think many filmmakers, most of the filmmakers whose films, I can talk about the Bengali films which I get to watch nowadays. I'm very sorry to say, but most of the filmmakers take themselves too seriously. Mrinal Sen is one who probably didn't take himself that seriously, and so he could make fun of himself. By himself, I mean the class in which he belongs, which is the educated middle class, and this education is gifted to us by the British, our colonial masters. So he made fun of that class, the bureaucracy in Bhuvan, and in Calcutta trilogy also you will find that there are moments of this fun and this wit. Not much because wit is probably not a very Indian thing, but there are some glimpses of humor if I can mention in this film, uh, and one anecdotal thing, not on any specific film, but he has time and again faced this problem because we said about getting financiers and stuff, and that happened also for Bhuvan Shom, is that he quoted the budget so low that many of the financiers used to think, at least in the early period till the 70s, that this person is not going to make a film because it is not possible to make a film in such a low budget. So he will probably take the money and just run away. And that happened with
Right.
Bhuvan Shom as well, because the government officials were absolutely refusing to buy this idea that he could make a film in 1 lakh or something, whatever was the budget of that film, and he could make it. And before the digital age, he was trying to make this point very clear that filmmaking need not necessarily be such a costly, expensive affair. I think that is one takeaway which we can think on his 100th year, that filmmaking is essentially a mode of expression. Obviously, it will be more expensive than writing. Obviously, it may be more expensive than painting, but it is not as expensive as it is made to be. And I think he made, and that is why he invented so many things, because he couldn't afford to waste money because he has a big budget.
Yeah, I think yeah, very very interesting takeaway, and because some students of mass communications are also there who aspire to make cinema. So of course, Mrinal Sen, as you have already said, that he has experimented in many ways to just adjust with his budget and all those things. So definitely, this will inspire them to be experimental in their cinema too. With this, we are coming to conclusion, and it has been great listening to you because, uh, uh, as I have said, that in a very systematic way, you have you have answered every question with such a gravity and kind of well-informed way that we are feeling that we are privileged to listen to you today. Uh, uh, if there is anything, Dr. Vijay Sharma would like to add, I invite her to speak so that we can conclude, later on.
Yeah, really, really, yeah, really, it was a really, really wonderful talk. Actually, I had a plan to write a book on Mrinal and I have written a few articles, and in that case, I have read all of his, seen all of his interviews, and whatever material I could collect, I have studied. But the way you have put it, so systematically, phase wise, that was really eye-opener. And the whole talk was in such a simple way. You explained such deep things about the cinema and especially cinema of Mrinal Sen. We are really fortunate, and I'm sure all the audience were also benefited with this. And I congratulate you. And in future, we are going to listen to you about many more people because you have written so many books. And as you know, I'm not able to speak much, so I am again telling Dr. Neha to continue. Please, thank you very much.
Uh, thank you so much, sir. And we are waiting for your next book, 75 films. When can we have it? If you can just.
Yeah, so that book is called 75 Years, 75 Films, India's Cinematic Journey. So this was a Publications Division's Government of India production. Um, it was supposed to be ready a year back, but it was mostly my fault that I had been late in giving the manuscript. So this um, looks at 75 films over the last 75 years, but it is not like that. It is one film every year. So it's not like that, because what I felt is that it's very difficult to choose films in the 50s, 60s, 70s. There were many films which I wanted to, but I couldn't keep. So this is it's my take. Any sort of list when some one person makes it, it opens up a lot of debates and conflicts. So I think this will be the same. So people will find that, okay, why this film is there and why not some other film. So we are. So I found out, or I prepared a list based on certain reasons. Those are not based on box office successes. Those were not based on awards, international or national. But why I felt those films are very important. So I think Mrinal Sen's two films I have put in this book. One is Bhuvan Shom for sure, and the other uh, is Akale Sandhane. I think these are the two films which are there in this book. And it will be expected to be out, I think, in next month in June. Uh, I will share it in my Facebook page once it is out with the link. Thank you for asking.
Okay. Yeah. Uh, Yeah, so we are definitely eagerly waiting the publication of this book, and looking forward to read your book on Tapan Sinha and Soumitra Chatterjee as well. Uh, Thank you so much, sir, for giving time to us, talking so much elaborately on Mrinal Sen. It has immensely benefited all the audience, and definitely personally to me as well. Your take on Mrinal Sen, on cinema, his technicalities of cinema, and his approach towards life, his approach towards cinema, perspectives, different perspectives which has come out from his cinema. Everything you have put in your speech, and we are looking forward to listen to you on more film personalities, and definitely we will request you to be with us, in other symposium also, so that your observation, your comments, your views will be highly beneficial for the young generation who want to make career in literature, cinema, and art. So thank you so much from the family of Srijan Samvad, and definitely we will meet again the next month in 126th uh, episode of this symposium. And till then, goodbye to everyone.